Men have an instinctive desire to be strong. We all want to be strong, whether it's psychological, emotional, physical, mental. We want to be strong. And no man likes to be weak. So that's a given. And we need to find out what areas and ways women want us to be strong and need us to be strong. Women want to be looked after. They get tired of having to look after themselves. And in fact, they're hardwired to not only protect themselves, but to protect their future children. So they're looking, as a friend of mine who's a Catholic female influencer, she says they're looking for muscles and wealth. And all this means is, it doesn't mean that women want a man who's on steroids and a man who's pumping iron and he's huge and all this, and they want somebody who's rich. No, they just want to make sure that they're going to be protected and provided for.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on an episode here at The Catholic Gentleman. We are your hosts. I'm John Heinen. We've also got Sam Guzman. Sam, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks be to God.
Good. We also got Devin Shad on the show. Devin, how are you doing?
I'm good, John. Just duking it out each day. Yeah.
Amen, right? Looking forward to talking about this topic with both of you men. So today we're going to be talking about the strength of men and how all women, that includes feminists, are in need of masculine strength. And it is God ordained. But strength comes in various different ways. And we want to talk about that today. We also get to answer a question from a listener who is dating a girl who has a degree in theology and is more spiritually advanced than him. And he's got insecurities about what this could mean for their relationship and his ability to lead. Really looking forward to that question. We love your questions. So if you want to hear us answer one of your questions, send it to us at podcast@catholicgentleman.com. If you actually do a voice audio recording, send us that. We'll play it here on air. And so if you like this episode and you want to support the Catholic Gentleman, I encourage you to head over to catholicgentlemanplus.com, where we are coming out with extended editions of podcast episodes every single week. In addition to that, we are recording this episode on the feast of St. Joseph the Worker. And this month of Mary, which is the month of May, we are giving away our exclusive custom rosary here, which actually has a picture of St. Joseph the Worker. Maybe I can get our video guy to put a picture of that on the screen here. This rosary is a $120 rosary created by the Catholic woodworker. But for all annual subscriptions, we are including this. We are including our book of quotes here, Be Not Afraid, and a lot more, plus all the digital content that we come to every single week and every single month with new sessions with guest experts. So it supports the Catholic Gentleman. It helps us continue doing this, continue reaching more men. And so we are grateful for everybody that's in there and everybody that's joining us. Please like and subscribe. And with that, and without further ado, let's dive in to the conversation on masculine strength. So, Devin sent me this article. Actually, it's not an article. It was a conversation that he had. And in this conversation, they discussed this Kent University research study about what women find desirable in men. And what was so fascinating about this research study that was done in 2018 was that they defined men into two categories in this study. And one of them was hostile sexist, right? And I think we know what that means. Misogynistic, dominating, opinionated, and all the negative qualities of masculinity. But they also put the other category, which was benevolent sexist. And those are kind and gentle men. And those are men that are chivalrous, honestly. And they even use that in the document as chivalry. And what is interesting, though, is the article has the presupposition that basically masculinity, or the research that masculinity is bad. And it doesn't matter. All forms of masculinity are sexist in their nature, and therefore the benevolent sexist is more dangerous because it's subtle, it's cunning, and it catches women unaware, and then they are, having to unknowingly subject themselves to men. And I laugh about this because they use the acronym for benevolent sexist to be BS. And I find a lot of humor in that. That it is a bunch of BS. But what for those of us who understand truth, for those of us who understand our God-given image and how we were created, men and women, we can laugh about this and we can see kind of this woke ideology and how it has affected the hearts and minds of even women and men. Actually, it was a couple men that put this together, in the negative. And so even chivalry is considered to be, dominating and controlling of women. And we need to be aware of that. But what was fascinating was they interviewed tons of women, including women that are self-proclaimed feminists. And all of them wanted chivalrous men. And so it was quite the study. And so with that, Devin, I'd love to hear your thoughts here about setting the stage, because we're going to be talking about the strength of men, and we're going to be breaking it down into 5 different ways that that strength can be conveyed. But I'd love to hear your thoughts just right out the gate here about that study and the strength of men.
Yeah. So it's a great study, because the study was set out to really demean men and put them in their place, right? And yet it boomeranged. It ended up having the opposite effect, which actually showed what women actually want and desire, which is a man who leads. Now, this is very important, though. So John Paul II, in his Theology Body, and I think in Love and Responsibility, talks about Ephesians 5, which is that marriage epistle, that passage about marriage being between, like, an analogy of Christ and his church. And he mentions that it's a compendium. It's a summa of the faith, which is very interesting, because he's saying of all the analogies, the marital analogy, the nuptial analogy is the least adequate. Least inadequate. So it's the most adequate of all the analogies we have of Christ's love for his church. And so what I think John Paul II is saying, and what Christ is saying through John Paul II, is saying, guys, if you want to know what real strength is, you need to come to this passage and understand what marriage is and what your role is. And here's what I would say. I'm going to say it. Ephesians 5, void of the gift of self, disinterested love, is rightly understood by women as tyranny. Okay? So strength, this is very important. Strength is often played out as domination, because after the curse, after the fall, that was the curse. You will bow down basically to your husband. You will long for him. He will dominate you. That's a product of the curse, right? But headship and strength is the ability of the man to initiate the gift of self-giving love. And that was headship prior to the fall. This is my body given up for you. So true strength.
Yeah, say that again, Devin. Yeah, headship and strength. Yeah, say that again.
So just headship prior to the fall.
Yeah.
This is my body given up for you. It's the ability to initiate the gift, to set the pace of self-giving love. That's what every man is called to do. But when we get this flipped, or when it's void of the gift of the man understanding his role as, this is my body given up for you, then tyranny steps in as a form of strength. Or I'm not even going to try it because I'm afraid of tyranny. I'm afraid of domination. So I'll acquiesce and I'll become the pusillanimous doormat.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what's at stake. Sam, love to hear your thoughts here as we're setting the stage on masculine strength.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of different angles through which we could approach this topic. But the one that comes more immediately to mind for me is just this idea that it's a breakdown of natural law. Like, basically, the ancients, when they talked about natural law, what were they talking about? Well, they just looked around at nature and they said, it looks like there's an order here. Things seem to work, like animals survive, human beings survive. Like, there seems to be a way, a wisdom to nature. Like, there's goals to things. Like, things aren't just random, but like there's a kind of a purpose that we can discern. There's goals that we can discern, even if it's just bare survival. That's a goal, right? And so you look around at the animal kingdom, and animals are oriented towards survival, towards propagation of the species, different things like that, right? And we can see evidence of that in nature. And so they came up with this idea that there's this natural law, but then taking it even further to human beings who have the capacity to discern like moral ends and, good and evil and things that are kind of beyond just the bare natural law of survival. Like there's order and purpose there too. And so they started discussing this, discerning this, codifying this. And for centuries, this idea that nature has an inherent wisdom or an inherent way to it prevailed. And so we tried as best as possible to orient civilization in accordance with the laws of nature. And you see this even up until like the founding fathers, where they're talking about like the law of nature and nature's God. Like, and there was this sense that there's this orderly harmony to the universe, and societies that flourish align themselves with this harmony. Okay, so I don't want to get too far afield here, but then like the Enlightenment happens, and the Industrial Revolution and things like that, and it's like science and technology start to prevail. And their basic thesis is nature needs to be dominated. Nature needs to be controlled. Nature needs to be overcome. In fact, the way of nature, the law of nature, is actually harmful, dangerous, to be suspicious of. It's not something that's good. What's good is our ability to dominate, control nature. So that's kind of the mindset, right? And then take that to its furthest extreme. We're going to erase nature altogether, and we're going to divorce the world of the mind and the psyche from the world of nature, so that we can deny nature altogether. And whenever it gets in our way, we can just rewrite everything, right? Which kind of takes us to gender ideology. Yes. Where it's like, it started with feminism saying implicitly, this wasn't explicitly stated, but like, we're envious of men, like women saying like, we don't like the fact that men are doing this and this and this and this. The solution to that is for us to be exactly like men and compete with men and actually prove that we can be just as good or even better than men. And so you see that like in playing out culturally with like, there's now more women in higher education, like in college, in graduate school, than men are, which is like unprecedented in human history. And so there's like this competition between the sexes. But all that to say, like, to me, it all goes back to this breakdown of natural law, where it's like, we're to the point where we're denying concrete biological facts, like the fact that men have more muscle mass than women, like a larger skeletal structure, things like that, that are just
more
kind
testosterone.
More testosterone, right? And like, these are not sexist statements. These are just biological realities. But we've gotten to the point where we have such hatred of nature, and we're so committed to our creating the world in our own image, that there's like this pride at the root of it, right? Where it's like, we can be whatever we want. Nothing is going to tell us otherwise, and like, and so we see the breakdown of the relationship between men and women to the point where there's this, gender fluidity and things, where it is like, what even is a woman, and what is a man? And it's just a style of clothing, it's just the way you wear your hair, or the way you talk. Right. But there's nothing beyond that. It's empty signifiers. Anyway, I'll stop talking.
Agreed. No, I think it's excellent, and there was a lot of great hits that both you and Devin just mentioned. A lot of themes that we bring back often, and it's a topsy-turvy world, right? It's upside down because of this. Well done, this chronological issue that you just laid out that we're all experiencing. And I know you and I, Sam, had a great meeting with Tony Eslon over a year ago, where we just talked about the physical strength of men as it relates to society, and as society needs it to lift big things and to do construction work and to have that. But as we fast forward, we've seen that intentionally removed and intentionally ignored. And we're here to actually talk about the strength of men as it relates to women in our lives. And I think that is another unique angle for us to talk about it. And listeners that you're listening in, we're not trying to downplay, hostile sexist, right? That this study looked at, right? There's definitely men that have used their stature, they've used their power and their prestige to control women and to do evil things and to not live.
That's that Andrew Tate episode you did recently, right?
That's
Where it's
right.
like, it's just like, he's a perfect example of this hostile sexism, right? Where women are just to be dominated, abused, used, controlled. And that's what masculinity is. And that's terrible.
That's right. And I think another thing about this study here that I was bringing up is that it sees love and love based on the foundation of sacrifice or sacrificial love as something maybe impossible and like not reality. And so their study is clearly void of that possibility of like, what is love? What is service? What is sacrifice? What is patience and these virtues that we as men have to be practicing to be saints and to know Christ and to be like Christ, as Devin states and we bring up frequently. That being said, it just sees that as like a non-issue or something that just really can't be considered. It's men are bad and men need to be put in their place, and we've got to figure this out. So we're going to throw all this BS at you, and and that's what we have. So I want to take that movement and I want to go through and start talking about physical strength as it relates to women. I guess that's the most obvious, right? When we are thinking about strength and the strength of men, we immediately think biological. And I did too when I was getting married, when I was discerning marriage and dating and things of that nature. It was definitely this whole physical strength, right? The thought of me being stronger, me being able to carry my future wife, me being able to carry multiple kids, on my arms and stuff like that, and do what a man needs to do to protect his family, were all thoughts on my mind. And I want to talk about that. So Devin, let's lean over to you and talk about why is physical strength important and what does it actually mean? And then we can talk about ways that it can be abused and or misunderstood.
Yeah, it's very important from the get-go that we understand that men have an instinctive desire to be strong. We all want to be strong, whether it's psychological, emotional, physical, mental. We want to be strong. And no man likes to be weak. So that's a given. And we need to find out what areas and ways women want us to be strong and need us to be strong. And that's what we're doing right here. So, and this is the other thing.
Thank you.
There's this other thing from the Kent State study. Women desire special treatment. Very important. And women are hardwired. And that's what the study proves. And it's hands down more studies that women want to be looked after. They get tired of having to look after themselves. And in fact, they're hardwired to not only protect themselves, but to protect their future children. So they're looking, as a friend of mine who's a Catholic female influencer, she says they're looking for muscles and wealth. And all this means is it doesn't mean that women want a man who's on steroids and a man who's pumping iron and he's huge and all this. And they want somebody who's rich. No, they just want to make sure that they're going to be protected and provided for. And that's very important. Okay. So I think when we get into this idea, the first way that we can be strong for women, physical strength, we need to understand what this is all about. Just a little story when my girlfriend broke up with me when I was in college and I was heartbroken, I decided I'm going to show her. And I started doing 2-a-days and I got really big. I went from 114 all the way to 163 and I was a monster. Wow. And I remember, And I was like going to show her I was going to get her back, but not let her get me back kind of thing. And I remember she called me and I said, "Hey, so have you seen me around, And she's like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "What do you think? I'm pretty huge, huh?" She goes, "You look like an ape." And I'm like, "Oh, so you're not attracted to that?" She's like, "Not at all." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, all this hard work. And I thought it was going to pay off because she's going to be so attracted to me." Oh man. And this is the truth. There's tons of books written on this and tons of studies, but a woman's body can actually make a man's body sexually aroused. Just almost instantaneously.
Yes, of course, yes.
But a man's body doesn't have that effect on a woman. You have to reach a woman through the heart. Now there's like 10%, 15% women, maybe the body can get turned on by another man's body, especially when they're younger. However, Generally speaking, that's not how women work. So what are women looking for? They're not looking for, a great bod at so much. They're not looking for a steroid pumped out man. What they're looking for is they want to know that this guy physically has what it takes to sacrifice himself for me. So the fact that he does have a good physique, the fact that he does take care of himself indicates at a spiritual or an emotional level, that guy can take care of me. That guy can protect me. And that guy can provide for me.
Oh, that's so great. And I just say that it actually doesn't stop, right? Like you were talking about when you got broken up with your girlfriend, but the amount of times in marriage that I have felt disconnected with my wife, and my mind immediately goes to, it's because I haven't been working out for the last couple months. Like I need to get back into working out, right? Like I know exactly. Our mind immediately, I mean, I'm not lying. This is absolutely occurs to me, and at the same time, I think when reflecting in preparation for this show, I thought that was you made such a good point, because we struggle to remove ourselves from ourselves, if that makes sense. We struggle to remove our minds from how we think. And because women physically stimulate us so easily, we make this assumption that maybe not as much, but definitely, it's there. And so then we kind of just believe that that's what they're looking for, right? And so that's what we have to provide them. And I know that you guys have both talked about your weight and that the concerns that you guys have had on that. And I get it. I so get it. It like doesn't change. We have to constantly remind ourselves of this fact.
Yeah, I think it's all. So Paul calls us to glorify God in our body. We're to be men of strength in our bodies. So what does that mean? I think we look to the ultimate man, Jesus Christ. And what does that mean? This is my body given up for you. And so whether it's the wife can't open up the tomato sauce jar, or she can't carry the compost bag into the garden, or whatever, or the tub down the basement, yeah, that's part of the sacrifice. But a bigger part of it is you are training yourself, and you should work out. And you should exercise, and you should train yourself, and you should at times go to the point of failure so that you can learn what that feels like in your body in case you need to do that for your wife and your family. But it's all a training to get into your psychological mode to know I am called to sacrifice with and in my body for my wife. And where we get into this particularly is with lust and sexuality. And I think we could probe in there just a little bit, because that So basically, John Paul II said in his Theology Bible that carnal love is meant and intended by God to be the expression of agape, disinterested love, self-sacrificial love. So how do we do that as men? Because this is a big part of the physical part, and you get into the emotional and psychological aspects, but I think that's an important aspect to this.
I so agree. Sam, I'm not following up after that. You let us know your thoughts here.
Yeah, well, the way I prove my strength to my wife is carrying all the groceries into the house in one go.
Nice.
Closing the trunk. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or, opening jars is a great way to prove your strength too. I mean,
that's right.
But no, I really I think the way to think about this is women have a high need for safety. Like that's just a biological reality as well as a psychological and emotional reality. But women have a biological need for safety. And if, in modern times, we don't think about this as much. It's still absolutely a factor. But, I think in the past when there were more physical dangers around, you can go back centuries, or you could go back even millennia, there were just more prevalent physical dangers, even things like, where are you going to get water? Well, the well is miles from our house, and we got to carry the water back and forth. And while we're carrying this water, we're vulnerable, and these factors that were just kind of provoked anxiety, right? So without getting too into the weeds, women have a high need for biological safety. Now, in our modern, comfortable, industrialized, modernized lives, that might not be front of mind the way it used to be, but it's still in the background. And a way to think about this, kind of this beastly man that's just shredded and ripped versus a man who has enough strength to take care of his family is it's kind of like a house, right? No one is going to want to move into a house where there's like holes in the walls, animals are coming in and out. There's no front door. There's no windows. There's holes in the roof where the rain can get in. And that's kind of like an image or analogy of like a weak man who doesn't have what it takes to protect his family, to provide in the ways that he needs to carry all those groceries into the house all at once. It's a house without walls, and that's terrifying to a woman. And what she wants is strong walls that can keep out threats and danger and can provide a sense of safety. Now, that also doesn't mean you need to be a fortress with 8-foot thick concrete walls, that are impenetrable to, everything. Right. Like, that's not what we're talking about here. And that's kind of like what I think guys think women want.
Yes, exactly.
But they don't want that. They want a place where they can thrive and flourish and relax and not worry about those threats coming from every direction. Exactly. And so to me, that's like, there's like a baseline strength that's necessary to provide that. But that also doesn't mean that you have to be that fortress, with, 12-inch biceps or whatever. Like, that's not what we're talking about.
16.
So. Yeah.
16. Okay, there you go.
That's right.
12 is big for me. So
well, I like what you guys are saying, and I think that this takes a level of maturity first, and I think that's really important. Is that we have to be mature men to really understand this. We have to really die to our failed images and our failed understanding of strength, because we do see it strictly as physical to measure up against other guys. And that's not really what women are looking at or looking for. And I think that's so good. I also want to just add that this goes for priests and deacons as well, priests that are listening in, right? There is something to be said about a priest that keeps himself in order and in shape, right? There's a natural belief, there's a natural feeling that this man is sacrificing for his flock, because he's learning to say no to himself. And I don't want to reduce it to just this, but it is important for us to mention this, that the amount of times that I have seen priests that are just incredibly overweight, they don't give that sort of presence to their as a shepherd to their flock.
Yeah, but a little nuance there. Okay,
Yeah, please.
Yeah, because I think it's very important, because there are some people who just can't lose weight. There are some people who they eat right, they exercise even, and yet they are dealing with a physical problem that
this
is
a
actually
cross
detrimental.
For them. Agreed.
And I would say this: I do know a priest. He is overweight, but it is something that he cannot help, and because he is humiliated by that, he receives the gift of humility, and in his preaching, he lacks pride. He is so pure and so bold and so strong that the flock just is. And to me, I'll be honest, I'm more attracted to him. I'm not attracted to his spiritual bent, because he's so humble. And so I just want to make that caveat. I agree. So it's not up to us to judge the appearance, but what we're saying here is, look, as far as we're concerned about ourselves, women are looking for men who can take care of them. And if you can't take care of yourself, then you can't take care of a woman, because you've got to love your neighbor as yourself. So if you don't love your body, as it says in Ephesians 5, a husband is to love his wife as his own body. If you don't love your body, then you're not going to love your wife. Take care of your body, be a man, exercise, even if you can't lose the weight, even if you can't, do it, and prove to your wife that you love her by trying. Because that's going to come in handy for your perseverance later on and your discipline later on, because it's all about discipline, perseverance, and the willingness to sacrifice in your body.
Agreed. And another thing that women are hardwired towards is not just protecting themselves, but also protecting their offspring, their children, right?
Yes.
Either now or in the future.
Exactly, yeah.
And the study even brings that up. And so I think that's really important. Sam, why don't you finish us off here on physical strength? There's more things I'd like to talk about, but I want to make sure that we move into the other ones. Yeah. So what are your final thoughts here on physical strength?
Yeah, well, I again, this is so important that it's a biological reality. And I'm not a big guy, but I've met women who work out like every day, and yet I'm still have more fundamental strength than they do, and it's just a biological reality. That's not because I'm a huge guy or anything. I'm pretty small compared to most men, honestly. But regardless of that, like, and so just goes to show that, that the strength that I have, even though I don't work out like I'm not a gym rat like that, I've met women who are, and I can still lift more than they do. And so the point is, God made us this way. Even though culture is dead set on erasing nature, nature exists nonetheless.
Amen.
And so the point is, the strength that men possess is for service. It is not for self-serving, self-aggrandizement, or dominating, or manipulating, or controlling, or overpowering. It's not that. Like, that is absolutely like a toxic man if that's what you think it's about. But our higher testosterone, our higher muscle mass, our bigger size, all of those things are to be oriented towards service. And this is a very traditional idea. This is chivalry, right? Yes. This is where it came out of, was women and children, regardless of your cultural context, are more physically vulnerable. Trigger warning, right? But it's a reality.
Yeah.
And so men have a responsibility to use the strength that we have to protect that vulnerability and to provide, and for our family specifically, first and foremost, my wife, my kids, but also radiating outward from that. If you see a woman that's threatened, and you're walking down a sidewalk or something like that, do not just stand there and take pictures with your cell phone. Like, you jump in there and you help. And I say that as like,
no, it's true.
It actually has happened where men have just stood by filming with a camera.
Yes.
Exactly.
So frustrating. John Paul II, he has this great quote in the Theology Body about how important man really is in this idea of, in a sense, physical strength, but which relates to, like you were talking about, service and sacrifice. He says, although the maintenance of the balance of the gift seems to have been entrusted both to the man and the woman, he says a special responsibility rests with the man above all, as if it depended on him whether the balance is maintained or broken, or even if it's already broken, that it becomes reestablished. So what he's saying is guys, it is up to you to sacrifice and to set that into motion. So let's say your relationship is stressed. You're the one that has to initiate forgiveness. If your relationship is tired, you're the one who has to engage in love and acts of love and secure her in closeness. So the idea is that the maintenance of the gift of self, that rests primarily on the man to be the initiator of that. And this is where I see that men are most weak right now, is that men expect the women to serve, or they're waiting for the woman to come around and do something for them. Whereas if you want a woman to love you, just step into the breach a little bit and serve her, pay her some attention and some time, sacrifice a little bit for her. And she's like, oh my gosh, somebody's actually paying attention to me. Somebody actually thinks I'm important. You're validating me. And her heart just opens up. It's like she is like a barren desert waiting for that rain.
And this is the thing, like, guys shrink back because they think leadership is equivalent to domination and abuse. And then, I don't want to be that kind of guy. So then they take on the nice guy role, where it's like, I'm never going to, and women aren't attracted to that. Nope. Like, masculine leadership looks like initiation, and the feminine vocation is reciprocation. It's really that simple. You just lead the way with initiation, with invitation, with that first step towards the woman, right? Even if she's not upholding her end of the bargain, right? But when you initiate, women respect that because it's a sign of courage and strength. And then there's a reciprocation. And And so, at any rate, that's more the psychological dimension. So maybe that's where we should go next. I don't know.
An example of this, a friend of mine who is incredibly talented, world-renowned composer, and super busy with his full-time job as a university professor, and then traveling the world doing all these performances. His wife comes down with MS. And they've already got, I think, 5 children at this time. And she can't even lift the child to breastfeed. She's so weak. It looks like it's over for her. And this guy, her husband, steps in and says, okay, let's figure out your diet, and I will do the diet with you. And I will do all the cooking to make sure that you don't have to do it. And then, wouldn't you know it, then he goes shopping. And my wife runs into him at all these grocery stores. It's like they're doing the tour together. It's like she's stalking him, you know? But anyway, he's got like 5 kids following him. He's got one strapped to his chest, one strapped to his back. And the guy is as happy. And he's had to give up some commissions. He's had to give up some traveling the world. And yet he's still this incredibly joyful man. And ironically, and this is the amazing thing about it, his wife no longer has any symptoms from MS. What is going on there? Sacrificial love heals. She feels his love, his attention, his sacrifice of time for her without any kind of resentment or like digging in and just, I'm going to just do this. He's doing it out of love, and out of love for her, and she just soaks that in, and that love and her diet is healing her. It's amazing. Wow. That's what a man can do for a woman.
Oh, it's incredible. And this theme of sacrifice, I just want to take a moment because it keeps on popping in my brain here, is that sacrifice is saying no to a good for a greater good, right? It is saying no to something that is good for a greater good. And sacrifice, coming from Latin sacrificium, or prefix sacer, right, is to make holy or holy. And so, yeah, thank you. And so I failed Latin. No, I didn't actually take Latin, but it's to make holy. And I think that's exactly what we're talking about here. And actually with all these forms of strength, and I do want to go on to psychological strength. I think it's so important. We've got our mental health counselor in the room. And I think that we see this in society today, right, is psychologically speaking, moving on to the next one here, is that a psychological strength is something that I don't think is given enough attention and given enough weight in our society. And our society certainly has a mental health crisis. We've talked about that on previous episodes. I have it personally in my family. I have personally experienced it with anxiety and depression, and misidentity and misformed reality of nature, as Sam's brought up here. So Sam, I'd love for you to talk to us about just this psychological strength, and what does that look like, and why is it important for the lives of men and the women that they connect with?
Yeah, well, I think the psychological is rooted in the biological in many ways, and one of the ways we've traditionally imagined this is that men are kind of more like the sun, like they're much more consistent. Women are like the moon; they go through phases on a monthly basis. Rooted in that biological cycle, right? But like hormones are changing. There's constant things like menopause is a factor for women where it's not as dramatic for men. And so there's this kind of this psychological consistency to men by and large. And for women though, there is this, like, the moon goes through all the phases every month, and so do the women, right? Like, and before the artificial light, like, it was totally synced with the lunar phases. So all that to say, like, there's this, women need that consistency. They need that psychological consistency, and again, sense of safety, where they know this man is going to be there for them, and that's not going to change. That's not going to waver. And she can have her ups and downs, and she can have moments of great joy and elation, and then she can be in the pit of despair, or sadness or grief. But he's going to be there for her no matter what, and she can count on that fact that he's always going to have that receptive quality for her, and he's going to be that pillar of strength for her psychologically. So that's kind of where I always start, is just noting that men have their ups and downs too, absolutely. I'm just saying it's often more dramatic and more consistently dramatic for women just due to those biological differences and realities that affect your mood, your emotions in a more pronounced way.
Thanks, Sam. I always am grateful for your thoughts. And uniquely, I want to point out one thing that you just brought up. Naturally, no preparation. We haven't had this conversation, but Sam immediately pointed to the psychological stability and or level of his wife, of us, of the other, not of himself, right? So we're talking about psychological strength, and there already is about it this communal aspect, this relationship that's building with the strength of your own psyche as well as your wife. And the fact that you just naturally moved it in that direction, I think we don't pay enough attention to that. And I want to use a story of a close friend of mine in Kansas City, where his wife was on benzos, and she had that horrendous benzo withdrawal. That's like, less than 1% of people that have this issue, but to the point where like her body felt like it was on fire, like quite literally on fire for years.
Oh my
and
God.
So she had they had multiple kids, to the point where hearing her kids talk sounded like they were shouting in her ears and was rattling her brain. And he was always so in control. He ended up getting new jobs, getting other jobs so that he could both take care of the kids as well as his wife. He started reaching out, asking for prayers, but even in these moments, he never was depressed. He never, and I know if he was on this show, he would like, oh no, I had my moments, but I tell you what, not externally. He was always his strength was always so in control, and it was phenomenal. It was a huge testament to me, because then he would send out these emails with like these epic long stories about what his wife was going through, and it sounded like she was quite literally in a living hell, and he was right there with her, carrying her and supporting her and doing everything in his life to die to himself and die to his own desires, to help take care of his wife, including, like getting new jobs that paid a little bit more money, that weren't enjoyable at all, but that fit their work schedule, doing multiple jobs, right? Just to make sure, and then asking for assistance for his kids, and doing all of this stuff for the sake of his wife, for the sake of her emotional, psychological, and even physical lack of strength, right? He was able to fill that void and to provide that for her. And it's phenomenal. He's a testament in my life of what can be done when love and sacrifice are at the center. So Devin, love your thoughts on
Yeah, that's awesome. What a great testimony. I mean, we're talking about psychological strength here, and this is just so perfect, that story, because what psych, soul, logical, we're speaking of the logic of the soul, right? And what is the logical soul's strength for a man is that if you look at Christ is the greatest man. What was his psychological strength? His psychological strength is that he did not doubt. He never doubted God's goodness. So whatever came his way, he always trusted that God the Father had what is best in his mind for Jesus, for the Son of God. And so he looked at his Father and said, yes, Father, you are good, and all things from you are good, and I'm living for your glory. And so when we have that attitude that Christ has, that's the logic. That's the logic of the soul. When we have that trust in God the Father, that whatever God does is good, then we overcome fear. Then we overcome anxiety. Then we overcome doubt. But here's what's happening. This is the opposite. What do men do now? Because of birth control, women are actually longing at times for more of a soft, effeminate man, because they lack the testosterone. They don't want the testosterone from men. And so they just want to be in this nice, soft, cuddly space, right? But that's implosive. But my point here is this. So then you get a guy who's transferring and communicating his doubts, his fears, his anxieties all the time, and he's not shielding his wife from himself. And I think that as men, our job psychologically is we've got to protect our wives from our personal war that we wage on ourselves. We need to protect our wives from the personal war that we wage on ourselves. And if you need to talk to somebody about it, confessor, get a spiritual director, but don't make your wife the punching bag of your mental instability with your fears, your doubts, your failures, all the stuff. We've all been there. We've all done that. And that's why I can
We
speak
have,
to it.
yeah.
But we got to shield our
Exactly.
wives from our own defeat, rejection, and loss. We got to be psychologically strong as Jesus Christ by trusting in the Father's goodness. It all comes back down to trust, which is the proof of sonship.
And men, it's not always easy. Sam, please, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and one of the things that I think we really need to guard ourselves against is contempt for women and their differences. You know, traditionally we look at like this hysterical woman, right? Like there's just kind of this cultural,
Right.
you know, thing that really, you know, that a lot of the early psychology and things like that came out of like where women would come to like Freud and Carl Jung and like they were so anxious and like they were just had all these disorders and then they just started, well, it was a hysterical woman, you know, they're just hysterical.
Yeah.
They're just it was like this dismissiveness, but women are different. They're just different. And then we say, well, what does that look like? Like, how can I straddle this line between not being a soft, effeminate man, but also not being like this aggressive, hostile, dominating man that's like dismissive of women and, you know, just laughing at how irrational they are and all of this stuff that men can sometimes tend towards. And the perfect example, as Devin was just saying, is our Lord Jesus Christ. Like the culture of the time, the Jewish culture of the time was sometimes hostile to women to the point where men weren't even allowed to talk to women. Like they couldn't even talk to them, right? Like you couldn't even address them. And you see over and over Jesus challenging those, not in any way violating any of the commandments. I'm not but absolutely like sometimes violating those cultural norms in order to uphold the dignity of women, such as the woman wiping his feet with her hair. Scandalous. Oh my goodness. The Pharisees were like foaming at the mouth over this. You know, like even talking to the women at the well, Jesus' disciples were shocked by this, right? Because women were just, they had their role culturally, don't get any, they're never to be, but Jesus saw them as human beings and wanted to uphold their dignity. And he looked at them with that gaze of love and dignity and didn't dismiss them as hysterical, didn't dismiss them as irrational, but saw them as a person made in the image and likeness of God, and upheld that dignity and respected that dignity, sometimes in the face of those cultural norms that were more dismissive of women and maybe even condescending or degrading to them in some ways. And Jesus had no time for that.
Yeah, so many great points. I think it's just excellent. And I want to, before moving on to the next one, just really emphasize what you started with, Sam, is that there is that physical strength as a dimension of the psychological strength. And men have likely experienced when you're not taking care of yourself by what you eat, when you're not taking care of yourself by your outward activities, it affects your mentality. It affects your psychology. It affects your anxiety, your depression. And so we are psychosomal beings that we've talked about before. And this is an incredibly important part for your psychological strength. And more importantly, for the psychological strength of the women in your lives, especially your wife. And so moving on, I want to talk about emotional strength, right? That's another one that we talk about a lot because we talk about virtues a lot. And we talk about the fact that emotions in and of themselves are not bad. They are a real part of our lives, right? But it's what we do with those emotions that matters. And if we are not in control of our emotions, they will control us. And I think that's really important in getting this across here, and the importance of being in control of our emotions. And because Sam just mentioned it on the psychological section, it's all for the sake of our wives. We have to, not only do we look at the emotional strength and stability of our wives, but how our emotions affect her and how we have to protect her from our emotions. And this was the biggest failing, I would say, of my marriage in the first 3 to 4 years of my marriage was my misunderstanding. I just saw protection as literally physical strength and like, well, you know, no one's come knock down our house and tried, you know, violating my wife, so I'm succeeding, you know, circumstantial as it was. The point being, though, I was never protecting her from emotions. I remember Michael Voris was a big thing, Church Milton. I was all into it, and I would just share things with her and realize that while it would irritate me for, you know, this Catholic senator did X, Y, and Z, it'd irritate me for a few hours. It'd irritate her for days, and it would affect my life now and the life of our kids because I didn't protect her from my own emotional frustrations and my own emotions. So I just like starting there, and I'll pass it over to you, Devin, to get your thoughts real quick here on this emotional strength.
Well, this is going to be scandalous, but I mean, from a biological standpoint, women emotionally are more fragile. Men have been given the gift, if you will, of testosterone, which makes us more competitive, more combative, and therefore we are able to defend and protect and even take the offensive. And my wife, we're just in this situation where, with her family, where I had to shield her. I had to step in and make sure that none of these family members could contact her. And she thanked me for it. She said, and she was listening to this video, because you have testosterone, you're so much more protective and you're able to do that. Whereas I'm emotionally a little bit more fragile. And that is the reality, the difference here. So what does it mean for men? Because women want our emotional strength. So what does it mean? Does it mean that we just shut down and we be the cold guy who's super resilient and we just have no emotions? No. But it does mean that our emotions are well regulated. Like you say, we don't spill these emotions over onto our wives. So I have a bad day and then I let it carry over into my relationship with my wife. Or I have problems with the kids and then all I do is complain about it to my wife. No. I think the key here is this. We look to Christ again. And what did Sam say just a minute ago? Sam, you were talking about the Samaritan woman. You're talking about the woman who's washing Jesus' feet. What is the key with Christ when it comes to women? He's tender. He's compassionate. And this is something that men, it's so foreign to us. It's like, okay, how do I be strong, but yet tender? That's the key. You don't let your emotions just take over and be this big softy or this big hard ass, but you literally learn how to be strong, but be tender. And this is very interesting. In the Theology Body, again, John Paul II talking about the sexual act between a man and a woman. And he's talking about how it's this visible sign. And he says, but for a man, he must take into account the shorter and more violent curve of arousal and he says, when we take that into account, tenderness on his part in the context of sexual intercourse acquires the significance of virtue. Now, think about this. He is saying that tenderness in sexual intercourse acquires the significance of virtue, which is what we're striving for, because that's true manliness, the balance between two extremes. And if the sexual act is the pinnacle, if you will, of the sign of self-giving in marriage, then what are we saying? Tenderness from a man in all aspects of marriage is the key in dealing with women. And that's where you show your strength. Because if you are physically strong, psychologically strong, emotionally strong, and yet you're tender, you've got the both and women love that.
Wow. We do not see that being played out and or taught frequently enough. Sam, love your thoughts on emotional strength and this importance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we've talked about this in different dimensions already, where it's, like, don't burden your wife with every fear, every anxiety that enters your head. Now, that's not to say there's a place for emotional vulnerability with your spouse. And, there's been times when I just feel at the end of my tether and I'm just ready to collapse. And I just tell my wife, like, I'm just, emotionally, physically drained. And she's there to support me in those moments. But be sensitive to the impact on your wife. And be sensitive to where she is, because if she's already in a heavy place or a dark place, and then you come in and you're like, "Oh, woe is me," you're just gonna make her burdens 10 times worse. But we have to be sensitive to the impact. And the other thing is, you need external support. Like, every man needs other men in his life. And every man needs, sometimes even professional help, maybe spiritual help with a spiritual director. But again, you need to not put all of your emotional eggs in one basket. You need to not like rely on your wife 100% exclusively for all the emotional support that you need, she's going to resent that eventually. You need other men in your life that you can open up to, that you can be vulnerable with, that you can share your struggles and your burdens with, who can support you as a man in those struggles of manhood. But your wife, as much as she may love you, she's never going to fully understand the burdens that men carry, just because they're different. So I would just say, like, have other support in your life, good friends, a men's group, spiritual director, and if necessary, even professional help. But do not burden your wife, overburden her with all of those needs. And your role is to be her strength and her support. And if you have needs, that's okay. It's okay to have emotions. Absolutely embrace that. But be aware, very aware of the impact.
Sam, I think that's great. And I think you made a tremendous distinction in what you said, because every good philosopher makes distinctions. But the distinction is when you're at the end of your rope and you're feeling fatigued, that's what you said. That kind of something along those lines.
Yes.
Then you communicate that to her. But notice what you didn't say. I come home from work and I burden her with my failure or my insecurity or the fact that the boss doesn't like me. There's a big difference. That's the distinction. And I think that so imagine your wife as a 12 foot by 12 foot circle in the ground that goes about 24 feet deep, and it's empty. And you got to fill that hole with dirt and with some seed that's going to bear whatever fruit you want. That's what she needs. She has a heart that is longing and thirsting for closeness, attention, and time, which is all emotional support. Okay. And if you go to her and just talk about all your problems and what's going on at work and how this person isn't doing this and blah, 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 you're only digging a deeper hole.
Yeah, you're just kicking up the dirt. Yeah, exactly.
So the key is to get out of your world and into hers and shield her from your own insecurities, your own fears, and your own bad day, unless you're at that limit or whatever. And like, look, I'm at my limit right now. That's great to communicate that. But look, we got to fill that hole with dirt. We got to fill it with love. And because I know this, I know so many men that are going through this when they don't. Their wives, it is the least amount of validation that happens at the gym or happens in the workplace. The least amount of validation that comes from a man, she's shocked. Oh my gosh, her heart flutters because someone paid attention to her. And it's not that she doesn't love her husband at home, but she hasn't felt that from her husband because he's so busy carrying out his own life and worrying about his own narcissistic self that he's forgotten to love her. So I'm just telling you, if you don't want to lose your wife, fill her emotionally. And one of the ways to do that is first shield her from your false emotions, get right with God on that, and then find out what's going on in her life and feed her emotionally.
Yeah, and I think this is where holiness is refined right here. It's not...
The other thing, too, is you have to be strong when she is not. Like, for example, like life is filled with struggles, with anxieties. Just this week, we had 2 issues happen with our vehicle that were very inconvenient and very frustrating, right? But my wife immediately, when things like that happen, she kind of goes into panic mode. She starts casting about and fretting and worrying. And thanks be to God, like I had the presence of mind. I was calm. I was centered. No, we're just going to deal with it. But that provides a tremendous amount of, again, safety for a woman psychologically. Whereas if I had been like, oh my goodness, like this is so inconvenient, I'm going to be late for this and this is going to be thrown off. And what are we going to do about this? And what if it costs this much? And, it would have made her anxiety go through the roof, right?
Her cortisol level.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Cortisol levels shoot up. Yep. And then what happens when her cortisol levels shoot up? Then she's not wanting to be intimate and she can hardly correspond with you in a cognitive way because she's going out of her mind. Literally. She's in defense mode.
Exactly.
So yeah, you're right.
Exactly.
And that's what we need to do is like, maybe I was worried too. Maybe I, had some concerns, but my job is in those moments is to be calm, centered, deliberate. And I need to do my own inner work to make sure that I can be that way for her when necessary. Just like you got to go to the gym sometimes to work out those muscles. Sometimes you got to do the inner work yourself where it's like, well, maybe I do get anxious and it's just overpowering. Well, okay, brother, do the work that you need to do to get to the place where you're no longer like that, because your wife is depending on you, again, to be that pillar of strength in her life that she can rely on, that she can trust in when she is feeling afraid, anxious, worried, but she knows that you've got this, and you can show up when she needs you to. That's so important for a wife emotionally.
Exactly.
You're her buckler and shield. Yeah.
That's right. And I think, and this is what I was trying to say, that this is where holiness is refined. It's not, we talked about multiple sclerosis. We talked about this benzo withdrawal. We talked about these heroic situations that are beautiful examples of the depths of strength and where they can go. But it's in these day in and day out details that holiness is really refined, where we get to practice these virtues of controlling our emotions, our psychological state for the sake of our wives. And in doing so, she will fill all of our needs as well, right? That reciprocal love will then be reciprocated. And I think that this is a beautiful point. So here we are at the end of this public edition of the episode. We're so thankful for you guys joining us. We are going to answer this question. Before we answer this question, if you like what we're talking about and you want to go hear the most extended edition where we talk about moral strength and spiritual strength, head over to Catholic Gentlemen Plus. All annual subscriptions this month, the month of Mary, are going to get, in addition to all the thank you package that we normally do, this incredible handmade exclusive Catholic Gentleman rosary with the pardon crucifix here in the month of Mary. I love this rosary. I've actually had it with me. I helped make it, and it means a lot. It's got the 3 hearts of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph on the back, and the Latin phrase in their holy hearts of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. And so I encourage you to head over there and join us inside of Catholic Gentlemen Plus. So here we are at the time. We're going to answer this listener's question today. And so let's listen in.
I'm currently dating and discerning marriage to a woman who I met through the church. She is studying for a Master's of Divinity and leading a small group and Bible study that we're both part of. These and other factors have led to my insecurity and a feeling that she's in a lot of positions and has had a lot of other experiences that better prepare her to lead and guide in the relationship. So my question is, how do I manage this insecurity and continue to lead confidently? Or am I just being irrational in my insecurity?
Yeah, so this is such an excellent question. And I'll start because this was my exact life. Now, you said she's studying for divinity. My wife actually already had an undergrad and a master's in philosophy and theology, and her master's in marriage and family studies. I met her actually while she was speaking to hundreds of people on sexual integrity from St. John Paul II. And then I sat down in a study group with her where she was leading love and responsibility, and she understood all of this stuff. And so, goodness, I felt inadequate. And I likewise had that exact same worry in my life, was how am I going to be the head of the family? How am I going to lead this, right? Like her prayer, never mind all of her knowledge, but her prayer, she was praying more than I was. She was like an hour a day. Like she was just so much more seasoned and experienced. And I loved it though, right? I was like, wow, this is incredible. It was inspiring. And so I yearned for that and to pursue. So I will say I like to turn to the saints, and I like to think about a couple saints like St. Peter and St. Joseph, day of this recording here, St. Joseph the Worker, and how St. Joseph, let's just be honest, right? So as much as you're concerned about this girlfriend of yours, and I was about my now wife, St. Joseph had the perfect woman. And so not only was she better at prayer, but she was also having conversations, holding Christ in her womb, and able to nurse Christ at her breast and be the Ark of the New Covenant. And so I would encourage you to turn to St. Joseph with these cares. They are, though, in that sense, irrational, because all the things that we've been talking about today in this episode, I thought this was such a perfect question to bring up, is that you have a strength that no women can fill. You have a strength that only a man can fill. And you need to embrace that and embrace your calling before God to become the man that she needs. And that is not degrees. It is not leading studies. It is being the man who's willing to die and sacrifice for her, being the man that's willing to lead and to actually be intentional about the ways in which he leads. So those are my thoughts right here at the beginning. It's worked out for me and my beautiful wife. She's the best thing in my life. And we have a lot of kids in a joyful marriage. So Sam, I'd love to get your thoughts here on this question.
Yeah, well, the first thing I would say is just don't turn it into a competition. When men feel threatened, sometimes that competitive side comes out, right? Where it's like, I'm going to show you, or I'm going to prove you.
That's so true.
Don't try that, right? Like, and if you want to learn more or whatever, like, and kind of become her equal intellectually or whatever it is that you're worried about, just don't make it a competition. Seek cooperation, and like John's saying, express that admiration, express how amazed you are at how much knowledge she has, or her abilities to lead and to form groups and things like that. But men and women are different, but often that difference is what leads to that complementarity in such a beautiful way. And my wife and I are very different people. She's 100% a hands-on, tactile person, where she's happy, baking bread or cooking in the kitchen, but she also is very good at putting things together. We get a new table from or bunk bed from IKEA. She loves putting that together, whereas
Wow.
I just get stressed, overwhelmed. I want to smash the thing or whatever. It's but she loves it, and so and I'm much more bookish and intellectual. So when something like that needs to be done, she loves doing it. She jumps right in. Now, I could be threatened by that as a man. Be like, I'm the man. I'm going to be the one putting things together.
Right.
And I'd put it together backwards and inside out and make a mess of things. But we've kind of come to an understanding where we just let each other flourish in our own domains. We're not threatened by it. We're not competing. But we're complementing each other, and we're cooperating, and we're letting each other shine in the ways that we shine best. And so that's my foremost advice, is just learn to cooperate and don't make it a competition.
So great. Devin.
Well, I think that Sam, you, John, and this man with this question have realized what many men haven't realized, is that the woman actually is smarter and better.
That's right. Exactly.
Let's face it. What Saint Thomas Aquinas said: what was first in God's intention is last in his execution. And so the creation account, Eve is last. She's first in his intention. She is life bearer. And then you've got the new Eve, that she's the pinnacle of human creation, Mary. And so what do we got here? All we're saying is that man, his acknowledgement that woman is so precious, so great, and maybe even so fragile, that it's my job to shield her and shield her from my insecurities. So what my comment on this is, look, you've got a great role. You've got an incredible wife. She's so gifted. Shield her, protect her, love her. And then at the same time, and this is very important, you go to God. You spend time with the Lord, and you cultivate that relationship with God so that you can become the man that she needs. And this is very important, because if you discover your sonship and your identity in your sonship, it isn't going to matter how smart she is and how gifted she is. She's just going to look up to you and admire you and depend on you for that strength that you have as being a confident son of God, because we know this: sons who trust God the Father become trusting fathers in the Son. And that's what you're called to be. And a woman loves that.
So great. So thank you for that question. We really appreciate it. If you want one of your questions answered, send it to us at podcast@catholicgentleman.com. We love talking about these. They have given us show ideas, and we just are really grateful for you sending them to us. Now is the time in the episode where we talk about putting on the new man. So this week we're talking about strength, and my challenge for every man is to work out this week, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you are already working out, right? We're all on a different spectrum. Push yourself this week. Be intentional about it. Know where that you are at on this spectrum. Maybe you haven't worked out in months and you just need to go on a nice long 20-minute walk, and that is going to be your workout, or do 10 push-ups and then go on a walk, right? Challenge yourself physically so as to be the man that this world needs, to be the man that your wife needs, to be the man that God has created you. So that is my challenge for you this week in putting on the new man. So thank you for listening to us. We hope you gained a lot out of the episode. I hope to hear you over or see you over and at the Catholic Gentleman Plus. Feel free to head over there, and we're going to have another conversation about moral and spiritual. So as we end each of our episodes,
Be a man, be a saint.